Hi, I'm Lorianne Wood, and you're listening to the Caretakers Journey podcast.
Welcome to our meaningful conversation today. I'm your host, Carole Leathem. As a caretaker, have you ever asked yourself the question, what happened to my life? I have found myself struggling with this pressure and pain of life not going the way that I think it should go, and then I blame God. And if you are like me, I am so excited because today's meaningful conversation with Lorianne is about a divine encounter, a divine detour that was caused by a serious medical diagnosis. And I know some of the listeners out there have reached out to me recently and told me that they've just hit a wall emotionally because of some serious medical diagnoses that came out of the blue. And so I'm really looking forward to having Lorianne share her divine detour and talk to us about how she is how she's dealing with it, how she dealt with it. And I'm really excited because I'll give you a little bit of a insight. We're going to do a two-part. So Lorianne and I are going to have a little conversation today. And then next week, when it drops, her husband Dell is going to be joining us for a further episode. So today, Lorianne, let me tell you about Lorianne. Lorianne lives with her husband in an empty nest in beautiful Bentonville, Arkansas. She discovered a serious heart condition almost too late, and she writes to encourage others to explore their difficult faith questions about the detours of life. And she has an award-winning book out that we're going to talk about today. It was released in February of 2023. It's called Divine Detour. The path you'd never choose can lead to a faith you always wanted. And I'm excited to hear her unpack this topic for us today. So, Lorianne, welcome to the show.
Oh, Carole, I've been looking forward to this conversation. I'm excited.
Oh, thank you so much. You know, when I got your book in the mail and I started reading through it, I always go the back cover, and you know, we should never discount the importance of a back cover as an author because so many times I go and I pick up a book, like I'll go wander through a bookstore and I'll pick up a book and I'll look at the back cover and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need this book so much. And what I love is that your back cover draws you in, and then the stories on the inside, they go right along with it and they keep you involved. So let's talk first about what prompted you to write Divine Detour.
I was prompted, I'm trying to think when I actually started writing it, but it all started pre-writing. It started about 9 years ago. I was kind of humming along with life. I still had kids at home and doing all the mom things and thought I was in great health. I had a medical evaluation for a life insurance policy, and they told me that I had less than 3% chance of ever developing heart disease in my lifetime. And
Okay.
I wasn't really surprised by that though, because I've always had low blood pressure and low cholesterol and just, I'm just a healthy person. There's not a lot of things in my family. There's a little bit of cancer like there is in most families, but I just didn't have much on my radar health wise. And so when I came down with what I thought was the flu, or maybe at worst pneumonia, Thanksgiving week, I went to convenient care because I had, all the things I wanted to do that week. And I had kids coming home from college and I had still some in high school, and I just wasn't getting any better. And then I spent Thanksgiving Day in bed, and then Black Friday rolled around and my husband immediately said, "You're going to the doctor." And I'm still trying to discount it. And he said,
Yeah.
"You're going." And he got up early that morning and he called and insisted I be seen immediately. And we now know that if he hadn't done that, I wouldn't have made it through the weekend. So
Wow.
what ended up happening is I went to my family practitioner, and he listened to my heart and immediately ordered a chest x-ray and found an extremely enlarged heart, and it was functioning at just 6%. And this just
Wow.
sort of started this health, falling downhill for me that I never saw coming. And I kept thinking I was going to get this magic bullet and I was going to be back upright. and things were going to be back to normal. And over the last 9 years, that's just never happened.
Mm.
Heart failure is chronic and it's progressive, and the heart is the only muscle in your body that doesn't heal itself. So
Wow.
the damage that you have, you deal with in the best ways that you can. And so that's what we've been dealing with. And while that's a big story, I think the bigger story through all of that was what it did with my faith, which I think we're going to talk about
Mm.
later on.
Yes, yes, yes. Whenever something my husband's mental health issues started just out of the blue 10 years ago. And it was like overnight he went from this high functioning human being to anxiety ridden, quickly into depression, and then the suicidal ideation became just so scary. And what I constantly stopped and asked myself is that question, why, what the heck, God, he was a pastor, we're serving you. We're healthy. We would constantly pay attention to eating and exercising and all that stuff. And I love the title Divine Detour because I love what you just said, what it does to our faith. Because you have a choice when this happens. Do you lean into your faith or do you walk away from your faith? And I've seen and talked to people who've done both. And so before we dive into the book, let's talk about heart failure, because my mom has congestive heart failure. And I think the listeners, sometimes I'm kind of shocked at some of the symptoms that we've had to figure out with her. So what are the heart failure warning signs that you yourself missed while you were not feeling well?
Yeah. I should probably kind of come clean. It felt like that diagnosis I got just kind of snuck up on me and came out of nowhere. But
Okay.
I can look back now and see for maybe 10 years before I was diagnosed, I
Mm,
had these sneaky symptoms, and
okay.
I just didn't recognize them as heart related. I passed them off as being out of shape or middle-aged or things like that, because my husband runs marathons, and my
Mm,
children are in high school sports, and they're all active. And so when I was feeling this inability to exercise, or a shortness of breath when we're hiking, or a
okay.
difficulty with an incline, I just thought, I'm out of shape. I've let myself
Yeah.
go. I'm going to get back into it and I'm going to fix this.
Mhm.
And I would hear my friends talk about, I've gained this weight and I can't get rid of it now. Or, I just feel so tired all the time. And so I just thought I was aging. I just thought I was
Yeah.
normal. One of the funny ones that I was going through this list with my children, because when they're taken all together, they can be very serious. Individually, they look so insignificant. So I was going through the list and I said, I don't think it's genetic. They don't believe my heart failure is genetic, but just in case, be aware of these symptoms. And I went through them and I got to this last one and I said, this is a symptom. It wasn't one of my symptoms, and that's a constant dry cough. And my youngest daughter said, Mom, you've always had a constant dry cough. When we would lose
What?
you in Walmart, that's how we'd find you, is we'd wait for you to cough.
What? Oh my gosh,
I had no
Lorianne.
idea. I had no idea. So, those are, and it's kind of scary, and I don't want to scare anyone, but what I want to impress is that just be completely honest with your doctor in your
Mhm.
checkups. And I know those go fast and you feel like you only need to hit the very most important high points, but document all those things that you're worried about, because they will take them as a group and look at them, and they know more about how those together can cause something much more serious than what we think they can.
Wow. So go through real quick and just give us a few of the symptoms. What are a few of the heart failure warning signs that you
Mhm.
missed?
I
So the
missed
dry cough.
the constant dry cough. I missed an inability to exercise. I tried to do a couch to 5K, and if you've ever done one of those, like day one is like stand up.
Yeah.
And I didn't make it past the first 3 days. I just couldn't do it. So I should have
Wow.
known
Okay.
then. I couldn't run
Mhm.
to the mailbox and back or trot or walk fast. I had a
Okay.
difficulty with any kind of incline, whether that might be a small hill in your neighborhood or a staircase. If you're walking
Okay.
up that and you're just out of breath, that's probably a sign that somebody needs to know about that. Shortness of breath, I
Okay.
don't even think I knew what it was, really,
Mhm.
but it's a
Yeah.
big one. It's a big one.
Okay.
And then I mentioned weight gain. If you have an unexpected, unexplained change in your weight, they drained 14 pounds of fluid from me at the hospital when I was first admitted.
Wow.
And I
Wow.
just thought, I need to watch what I'm eating. But it was all fluid retention because my heart was failing.
Okay.
Um, if you have a fatigue that you can't explain, that could be a sign of a lot of serious conditions, and that needs to be
Mhm.
somebody needs to have eyes on that. So, and
Yeah.
then just I had a sudden, and this isn't always the case, but I would have a sudden rapid heart rate. I
Okay.
taught
Mhm.
college courses for 20 something years, and every time I would get up to do a lecture, I would have my heart just beating so fast. And I thought, that's just what people talk about public speaking. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
those
they
are
think it's
just some of
nerves.
them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I think sometimes when we talk about warning signs, we just have to be reminded. We just have to be reminded. And I know one of the things that I've talked a lot about is when you're dealing with someone who has mental health issues, the warning signs of mental health issues. A lot of those warning signs I ignored. The
Mhm.
anxiety, the little tiny things that were like, what is that? Why is that happening? And why is he responding that way? And if we ignore, or if we just say, oh, well, let's just see, let's just wait for a few weeks and see what happens. It's so dangerous. Well, let's talk about your book for a minute, because I really enjoyed your book. Your book is written very uniquely. It's a collection of essays, which I like that, because as a caretaker, it's hard to sit down and dive into a book, and then you get into the book and it's a topic you really want to read about, and you're in the middle of it, and then you get pulled away for some responsibility. It's hard to find. I struggle with finding long periods of time where I can actually sit down and read a book. So when I find something like your book, which is a collection of essays that I can just, okay, let me just read one essay. I don't feel like I have to sit down and read the whole book. So your book contains 40 days of essays. So the first question is, why 40? And then we'll talk about the essays in a minute. So
Okay.
why 40?
You know, I kind of stumbled into 40. I started writing this book and didn't really have an idea of how it was going to take shape. I knew, and like we're going to talk about, I knew I wanted them to be short standalone pieces, but I'm like, how many and where does it end?
Yeah.
And I started thinking about 30 because that was a month, and then
Yeah.
40 popped into my mind. And as I started looking at that, I think all of us, most of us that have, been familiar with scripture know that 40 in the Bible is pretty important
Yes.
number. But we think of
Yes.
it as a number that represents trial or testing. And
Mm-hmm.
we can just think of so many, like, Moses fasted for 40 days, Israelites
Yes.
wandered for 40 years.
Yes.
Noah survived 40 days in the ark, and there's so many. Maybe,
Yeah.
and the one that, I kind of leaned into, in the book is the 40 days that Jesus spent in the desert. So
Yes.
that was a time of trial or testing, and so that resonated with me. But what I didn't realize until I'm starting to write and I'm starting to work through all of this and my diagnosis and what it's doing to my faith is I realized that also in scripture, 40 is God's environment for change.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
every time in scripture, there's a trial that involves the number 40 or 40 days, 40 years, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
There was something new. on the other side of that. God was giving people a new plan for this new phase that he had laid out
Yes.
for them. And so that's when I knew, I'm like, it needs to be 40, because I not only want to address the trial, but I want to give them a plan for
Yeah.
change.
A plan for change. I love that. So why the essay? That's kind of a not traditional format. And what was it that led you to do it in this essay form?
Mhm. Carol, I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said that you had a short attention span, because
Yeah.
I had a short
Yes.
attention span when I was writing it. So I knew that whoever's reading it had to, and turns out that's that's true. Anybody that is, in any sort of trauma situation or grief
Yes.
or pain situation, they just have a shorter attention span. And
Yes.
even those people who aren't at the moment in one of those situations, our attention span has been so shortened by,
Yeah.
online reading, that we we want, our brain is being rewired to want these shorter episodes. And
Hmm.
I, I wanted the reader to have that, because I think that's how, not only it's not only how we like to read now, but it's also sort of how we figure out life, right? We don't figure out
Oh,
life
absolutely.
in, they're little snippets, they're little
Right.
nuggets that we grab onto that get us through. And so I set it up so that in 3 to 5 minutes, someone can read one of the essays and take away with some sort of new discovery. And it's a little bit like a children's book, or it's becoming that way for some people, because they go back to that essay and they reread it and they say, I remember
Yes.
that one essay
Absolutely.
and I need to reread it. So that has been something that I didn't know I was going to do it like that,
Hmm.
but God knew, and he's
Yeah.
using that.
I think that's so, I think you're so smart. And I love that God led you to do this, because I know for me, I'm an early morning person. So it's very rare that I sleep in past 5 o'clock. I'm usually awake at 4 a.m. and I get up and I go through kind of a little bit of a morning routine. And one of the morning routines is, there's so many different layers to caretaking in my life right now that I can get so completely overwhelmed. And I am a Post-it note girl, and I go through Post-it notes like crazy. And so one of the things that I do to help me is I write the things on a Post-it note, and I put them either on my computer screen or on this window to the right of me. It's actually covered with Post-it notes. If you listeners were seeing the video, I'd turn it around and show it to you, but it's covered with probably close to 100 Post-it notes. And some of them are things I want to remember. Some of them are just things that are inspiring to me. And one of the things I love is that you can go back. You can go back to one of your essays. If it meant something particularly, 4 months from now, you're going to go, okay, I remember I read that. You can go through the book and so what I've done is I have little tiny Post-it notes that I put in there with the essays that mean something.
Aw.
So when I get to that point in crisis, I know where to go. So I love that. Well, you share that there's a special backstory to the cover design. Can you share what that is? Because it's a beautiful book. I love the book.
Oh, thank you. Well, first of all, I have to say, I think we were separated at birth on the sticky notes, because that's how, and if I could turn my camera around, you would also see, I have 2 doors in here that are covered with them, because that's how I arranged my book, was I moved these sticky notes around. So we could keep them in business between the 2 of us.
Yes. Yes, I think you're right. I have a drawer. I actually have a drawer. One of the drawers from my desk is filled with nothing but sticky notes, because I have to have a different color or a different design or a different shape for
Yes.
each of the things that I have. And so, yeah,
I love
my
it.
whole
It
book,
changes the world.
my book in the back has a synopsis. There's like things, each chapter has a synopsis in the back of my book, so that you can go back and go, what was this? What was this? And then I have sticky note moments, because I share in the book, write this on a sticky note and put it where. So
Yes.
yeah, there you go.
I love
So
it.
tell us about the story behind the cover design.
Yeah, so the cover is a dirt road, and it's between fields, and, I didn't choose it, my publisher chose it, but when they chose it, it seemed familiar to me. It felt like I had seen that before, and I grew up and so many of the stories in the book are about things that happened in my childhood in South Central Kansas, and my family were wheat farmers. And we were
Okay.
there, in May, right after this book published, and I took photographs because there were pictures that looked exactly like the cover.
Wow.
And it was eerie. I've posted them on social media to say, "This is the picture I took, and this is my cover." And I love it because the road that's on the cover is dirt. It's rough. It's like a
Yeah.
detour. You don't wanna drive on that.
Mhm.
It has all
Mm-mm.
those ridges in it. There's no curbs on it, um, especially if there was
The
a
potholes.
rainstorm. Yes, potholes and all of that. And that's the basis of the book is we get thrown off on this road we don't wanna be on. And on the book, you can see the road kinda, twisting at the
Yeah,
end. You don't know where it's headed, but you're on
right.
it, and you're just going. And maybe the most special thing about the cover was I knew all of that I just told you about the cover, but it was after the book was published that I learned that that is actually done from a photograph that was taken in Ukraine, and Ukraine is
Wow.
another big wheat producer in the world. And so I
That's
just
so cool.
felt this like, that's so cool. And
Yeah.
then, I learned after I shared that my book has made it to Ukraine. So,
Oh, that's amazing.
it was so special to me to know that connection, not only with the contents of the book and how that
Mhm.
picture represented it, but that it had that sort of universal appeal as well.
You know, when we talk about detours, we talk about finding joy when life gets messy, which is the title of my book. I think there is a universal connection. And when I launched the podcast almost 7 months ago, I never imagined that we would be in 9 countries now, and that it's touching the lives of people that I don't know, I may never meet, but somebody has reached out to me and said, "Oh my gosh, thank you. I live really far away from you, and I thought I was the only one." And I'm like, holy moly. It's like, okay, take a deep breath. God, this is a connection. And I love your picture of this dirt road because that is what it feels like when life just takes this chaotic turn that we weren't expecting. So it's a beautiful picture, but it's a hard road to be on. And
Yeah.
so there's this combination of the hard and the beautiful. And, every time you hit a pothole, you're just like, oh my gosh, am I going to recover from this? And so that's so beautiful. And I love that connection that you wrote, that you grew up in a wheat farm and then here's this picture in the Ukraine. Oh, that's perfect. So what's a favorite or particularly meaningful essay that you have in the book? What if you were going to say this is the one essay you should read? We're going to read them all, but tell us one that you particularly want us to read.
Yeah. Well, I think one of my favorite ones ended up being the very first one in the book, and it speaks to what you were just talking about. It's it talks about grief and gratitude. The name of the essay is "A Season of
Mhm.
Grief and Gratitude," and it's like being on that road. You're grateful that the road is there. You're grateful that you have that way, but it's not the way you wanted it to be, and so you're grieving a little bit of the route
Yeah.
that you wanted to be on,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
it just seemed to resonate with so many people because when they read that, so many people have reached back out to me and said, I don't have any health issues. I don't have any, certainly don't have heart failure, but I'm on this other detour. I'm on a family detour or a career
Yep.
detour. And what you're saying makes so much sense because I'm grieving this
Mhm.
thing, but I'm
Yes.
also so grateful to be where I am, and how can I hold those 2 things at the same time? Because it feels weird. to have both of those
Mhm.
things and try to
Oh
balance
my gosh.
those 2 things.
Oh. Oh, Lorianne, I wish we could sit down and have coffee because I think there's some real connection here. And you and I did not really talk much. In fact, we've never really talked until this morning. But I have an illustration that I use about the combination of joy and grief, and I call it the dance. And we live so much of our life with grief and joy in the same hand.
Mhm.
And it shouldn't make sense. There shouldn't be any way that this should make sense, and yet it does. There's this pull and this push. And I was watching, my husband loves reality shows, and we were watching a dancing show one night, and all of a sudden God said, look at this man and this woman as they're going through this dance, and they dance completely different. They each have a role to play,
Mm.
but when you put them together and you trust, there's this beautiful flow that happens. And so when I start to find myself really falling into the grief, then I stop and I go, okay, what can I be grateful for? And then what that does is it pulls that back in, and it doesn't make the grief go away, but it pulls something different so that my heart can kind of dance back and forth between the grief and the joy. And I just think that's so beautiful, and I love that. So what's the most, if you're going to tell the readers, this is the one thing that I want you to learn, or this is the most important thing I want you to take away from this book about faith, about their own faith, because that is one thing you want us to tap into, is that faith. What is that one thing you'd want us to take away?
Mhm. You know, I grew up in a time where there was value in answers. And if you had a
I love that.
question, you better know the answer already before you ask it, right? Or don't ask it. It's too
Yes.
dangerous.
Yes.
Don't go there.
Yes.
And what I've learned is that there's so much value in questions. And the whole book is written around what I think are the 3 questions that everyone's going to answer. Everyone's going to confront those questions in their life. And so
Mm,
you should just lean into them, because when you're on a detour, they always nag at you, but when you're on a
yeah.
detour, they're like, "I will be you will pay attention to me." And that's what
Yes.
happened to me. And I learned that I didn't wanna lean into those questions, but because it felt like I was abandoning my faith or stepping away from
Yeah.
it, or, shaking it up or making it weak. And what I learned is that the opposite of faith isn't these questions. The opposite of faith is just indifference. It's just walking
Oh,
away,
so true.
you know?
So true. So true. Because God is strong enough for us to ask him questions. And
Yes.
I know in my book, I talk about the times that I would go out into the garage because that was the one place I could yell and
Mhm,
scream. And
mhm,
my family in my house wouldn't hear me because the
mhm,
garage is kind of insulated from the rest of the house. People on the street could probably hear me, but people in the house that I cared about couldn't. And I would just stand there and I'd scream, God, what the heck what are you doing? Do
mhm,
you get what's happening here? And I think there's a frustration. And if we don't voice that frustration, then it just kind of sits inside and it just kind of festers. And that's when
mhm.
I think we walk away and I love the word indifference. I've never heard that, but I love the word indifference because it is true. We either lean in we become indifferent. And sometimes leaning in is telling God, do you get this? And of course he does, because there's not anything that happens in our life that God says, oh, I didn't know that was going to happen. It's not true. But sometimes the conversation is helpful to us. So I love that. You talk about, I love this next question I'm going to ask you because I'm really curious to know what you're going to say. People listening to this often struggle with questioning God, which is what we're talking about when things get difficult. And they say, "Oh, you shouldn't question God. You don't have enough faith. That's why this is going on." But what is your best advice on how someone can deal with this when they're starting to question because they're struggling, because it's difficult?
Mhm. I think, one of the big things is, like you said, we have that choice whether we engage with our faith or whether we just walk away from it. Because when we walk away, that's when the faith begins to die because we're separating ourselves
Mm-hmm.
from it. But when
Yes.
we are in there and we're saying, okay, God, I don't get it, we're talking to him. We're reaching out to
Mm-hmm.
him. We're keeping, and when you think about it, God has gone to incredible lengths throughout history to keep the conversation going with his people. And it
Yes.
gets messy.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
our job is just to not slam the bedroom door on him. Our job is to just keep asking him. He's not going to give up on us, but he is going to let us walk
Mm-hmm.
away if that's what we choose. So,
Yeah.
you get to that point and that's your choice. You don't have to be, all sunshine and rainbows every day, but just don't, if all you're holding on to is just a tether, just hang on to that.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be a bunch of questions at some point in your life.
Yeah. I tend to write those questions on a Post-it note, and I have a special place where I put them. And then sometimes I'll take them down because I'll put them up there when they're like in the forefront of my mind, and then I'll take them down and I'll shred them until they come back. And I've seen myself, there's a couple of them. What happened to my life tends to be the biggest question that I ask God. And what's so interesting is that you talk also about this intense silence when you felt God's intense silence on your detour. And there have been times when I don't know where to turn. I don't know who to talk to. I don't know who to trust. I don't know what to do. And I feel so alone. And then when I try to turn to God, I just feel like this intense, like silence. And so talk to us about that. And how has that affected your faith journey?
The silence is hard. I mean, there's no doubt about it because we can feel like it's kind of a one-sided conversation. And what I've learned through all those months, and I had 16 months where people were praying for me around the clock because I was just kind of holding on by my fingertips and I wasn't getting any better. And so I had this burden of not only silence for my prayers, but silence for other people's prayers on my behalf.
Mm-hmm.
And what I learned in that time is that sometimes the power of our prayer is not in getting this immediate resolution of something that we're asking for, but it's in forming this relationship that's never going to be
Yes.
taken away. You know, if I had gotten an immediate reversal of my heart failure, I probably wouldn't be talking to you right now. And I
Mm-hmm.
certainly wouldn't have the depth of faith that I have right now. And someday my heart's going to stop, whether I'm,
Yeah.
60 or 96 or whatever it is. So that I can't keep. I can't keep that health prayer. That if I was given that as an answer, I can't keep it. But I can
Mm-hmm.
keep that relationship that
Yeah.
established during the silence. And so my husband had told me early on, and it just really resonated with me. He said that when we weren't getting the answers we were hoping for and that we were begging for, he said, we're trading what we can't keep for something we can never lose. And
Oh,
I said,
say
that's
that
so
again.
true. We're trading
Say
what
that
we
again.
can't keep for something we can never lose.
So good. So, so good. I have a friend who's been battling cancer for 14 years, and it'll go away and it'll come back and it'll go away and they'll come back. And each time it comes back. And I was having breakfast with her one day and she said, I said, how can I pray for you? And she said, I love that you're asking me that question. And I said, okay, so tell me, how can I pray for you? She goes, well, don't pray for healing because I'm going to be healed. We just don't know if it's going to be here or in heaven. So I'm going to be healed. There's no question. So don't pray for my healing. And I said, oh, okay. I said, what do you want me to pray for? She said, will you pray for my family? Because they're driving me crazy.
Mm.
She goes, they won't let me do anything. They won't let me stand up. I can't go do that. She goes, it is driving me crazy. And I need them to let me live. And it's like they're trying to put me in this protective box because they don't want to lose me, but they're taking away the joy of living for me. And I was like, Okay. And do you know that woman went on to start a support group for people with cancer or for people who are caring for cancer while she's battling cancer herself? And I got to hear the other night the testimony of a couple of women who are in that group. And I just sat there and cried because I thought, how beautiful is it that her prayer was, don't heal me, God, because I know you're going to, you got that covered, but help my family let me live.
Mm.
And I think it's so important that when we lean into God during this journey, even in the quiet times, sometimes I get to the other side of the quiet times and I see that he was talking all along and I wasn't paying attention. Sometimes the quiet times are when I do the most reflection. So let's share with us how your health, and obviously your faith is doing great because we're sitting here having this conversation, but share with us how your health and your faith are right now in this day.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think for sure, like you said, my faith is stronger. It's, I got it down off the shelf and used it, and I wrestled with it and we got stronger, and it was a blessing in that way. I mentioned that as far as my health goes, heart failure is a chronic progressive disease, and they can't cure heart failure yet. And so I'm on a lot of medication and I've had a couple of different devices installed. And at this point, my heart function, it was at once at 6% when I was first diagnosed and has fluctuated. And lately it's gone down a couple of times and I'm now at 20%. And
Okay.
I take that 20% and I use it for all I can during a day. And
love
yeah,
that.
I'm
I love that.
I'm a very high functioning for 20%, and I'm really grateful for that.
Well, I love that. I love when you said take my faith down off the shelf and use it. Oh my gosh, that's so good. I'll give you credit, Lorianne, but I'm probably going to steal that. Because that's so good. How many times do we open our Bible and that's where we think our faith is? And then we close our Bible and we put our Bible back on the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
And then we kind of go off and feel like we're on our own. And that is not how God intended it. So, Lorianne, thank you so much for joining us today. How can people stay connected to you?
Oh, well, I would love to see people over at my website, which is just loriannewood.com. I'm also Lorianne Wood on Instagram and Facebook. And I do want to mention that if anyone is feeling like they have those heart failure symptoms or they're wondering what those are, I have a free download that you can get. It's loriannewood.com/heart. And if, on the other hand, you are facing that silence with God and you're finding it hard to pray, I have something to help you there out of the trenches. And it's at loriannewood.com/hope. So I would, love to connect. Love to hear your story.
We'll put all of that information in the show notes, and then you can just click on the link and go and pick those downloads up. So, Lori, I'd like to close out every show because as a caretaker, one of the things that I think we tend to do the least is take care of ourselves. And so whether we're the one struggling, whether we're the one caring for the person, we always need to do something. And so every day I make it a point, what am I going to do today to take care of myself? What is one thing? And I make it a point to say, what is one thing? Because if I say, oh, I'm going to do this and this and this, then I don't mind, we can not make it a mindful choice. So I believe that when you tell me what you're going to do today to take care of yourself, you have to do it because you spoke it out into the universe. So Lorianne, what is one thing you are going to do in the next 24 hours to take care of you?
I am going to admit that I need 10 to 12 hours of sleep at night and get it. And
Good.
I'm going to do that because it's so against my personality. But as someone who needs caregiving, I think we owe it to our caregiver to take the best care of ourselves that we can and admit when, that's past my ability to do today. And that's helpful for me, but it's also helpful for the people that are coming alongside me.
I love that. Well, thank you for joining me today. And next week, we're going to have an episode where we're going to have your husband, Del, join us. But I love that you're here. I love that you're encouraging the caregivers who are listening, the ones who are being cared for. And I will put all your links and social media information in the show notes. And I appreciate each of you listeners. I know I say this a lot, but our journeys as caretakers can be so hard, and we can get caught so up in the emotions that we face and the changes and just the frustrations of every day. I mean, today we're recording this on a Saturday morning and it's not even 10 o'clock here. And I've already had 5 different caretaking phone calls or texts, and I missed one in the middle of the night. And, it's like, it can just be so hard, and we can tend to isolate and feel like we're alone. But I want you to know that the Caretaker's Journey ministry and podcast exists to let you know that as a caretaker, you're not alone, that you are loved and seen, and that you are more than one of 55 million unpaid caregivers in the US alone. So I'm a caretaker, you're a caretaker, you're not alone. And if you would like to know more about my personal journey of caretaking, the links to my website, Social Media Books book, will be in the show notes as well. And I will be back next week for another meaningful conversation about the caretaker's journey. And until then, it's all about him.